My name is Charles Norman Shay. I'm a Penobscot Indian. I come from the Penobscot Indian Nation in the state of Maine. I was born in 1924, 27th of June. I joined the military service in 1943 in April. I was conscripted. I did not volunteer. The reason I did not volunteer was because the people of the Penobscot Indian Nation had no voting rights in the state of Maine, and they did not get the voting right until the 1950 in federal elections and in 1967 in state and local elections. That was a long time after the war ended. My mother was an advocate for rights, for the Indian rights, and she disagreed with the conscription of drafting young Indian men into the military service without giving them voting rights, and that is why I did not volunteer, because I agreed with my mother. I was finally drafted, as I said before, in April of 1943. Took my basic training in Virginia. Then I was shipped off to, after I had completed my basic training, I was shipped off to Indianapolis, Indiana, Fort Benjamin Harrison, and there I was trained as a surgical technician. After I had finished my training, I had a short furlough, went home to see my parents. My mother accompanied me to New York, and I boarded the Queen Elizabeth for transportation to England. I got into a replacement depot in England. I don't know the name of the town or the name of the camp. But anyway, I was only there a short time, and I was assigned to the 16th Infantry Regiment, Medical Detachment of the 16th Infantry Regiment, 1st Infantry Division. We trained very rigorously for, we knew that we were going to be involved in a large operation, but we didn't know what it was. But we eventually figured it out because of the training that we were receiving. Boarding ships, debarking into smaller craft and things like this. On the first week in June of 1944, we were finally ordered to load ships in one of the harbors in England, and on the 5th, the invasion was supposed to have taken place on the 5th, but because of inclement weather, they could not sail, and they had to postpone it for 24 hours. Sometime around late afternoon or midnight, we left the coast of England, and we were transported about 12 miles offshore of Normandy. We were in the holds of the ship, of course, where we had sleeping quarters. And about 3 o'clock in the morning, we were told to prepare to debark into smaller landing craft. We boarded smaller landing craft, and these landing craft were scheduled to proceed to the beach in a group of 5 or 6 landing craft at a time. So we had to go into a area assembly area in the sea, of course. The small landing craft circled around until the number of landing craft that were in one group had all been assembled. And about 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the morning, we were given the orders to proceed to the beach. We got to the beaches shortly after 6. Maybe a little bit, well, it was closer to 6:30 in the morning. And we could not get up to the beaches, very close to the beaches, because the Germans had put barriers well out beyond the land, the low tide area. So that meant that when we hit these barriers, we could not proceed any further to the beaches, and the order was given to debark. Of course, at that time, there was very much shelling, mortar fire, machine gun fire, small arms fire going all around us. Some of the landing craft received a direct hit and were blown to pieces in the air from artillery or mortar shells or whatever. And once we hit these barriers, the order was given to debark, and the ramp was dropped. Of course, we were being raked with machine gun fire, and the men that were up at the front of the debarking LCVP, some of them were wounded immediately. They all had heavy equipment, and once they fell into the water, the equipment became waterlogged, and if they were wounded to any degree, some of them just sank to the bottom because they could not help themselves. And it was every man for himself. You could not expect help from anybody. If you didn't make it, well, that was too bad. So I finally made it to the, when I left the landing craft, I landed into water up to my chest. And of course, when you have boots on, clothing, heavy clothing and so forth, and you're waterlogged, it's very difficult to move. But I finally made it to a water that was not so deep, and I was using the barriers that the Germans had put up as protection. That meant that I would go from one barricade to the next until I made the beach. I was not wounded, and I finally made the beach. I was trained as a medic, and once I made the beach and got up behind the, I don't know what you want to call it, the area where it washes up the sand and the pebbles and so forth, and there was a little bit of protection there, much needed protection. And I made it to that protected area, and it gave you a little bit of time to regain your senses. And being trained as a medic, then I proceeded to do my job, what I was trained for. Treating the wounded, bandaging broken bones or open wounds, making temporary splints, giving morphine. And I happened to glance back to the ocean while I was working on some people, and I saw that there were many wounded men that were floundering. The tide was coming in very fast. There were many wounded men that were floundering in the sea that couldn't help themselves, and they were doomed to drown. So I proceeded back to the seas, and I did what I could. I don't know where my strength came from, but I grabbed them, turned them over on their backs. I grabbed them under the arms, and I took them up to as far as I could drag them out of the water to get them above the high tide area. I did this for, I don't know how many men I did this for, until I became exhausted, and I had to return to the protected area to rest a little bit, and then I proceeded with my mission of trying to rescue as many as I could. Eventually, well, not eventually, it was a couple of hours, the firepower of the Germans began to diminish because some of the men were able to make it off of the beach, and they were able to knock out machine gun areas, machine gun nests, and some of the artillery areas. Some of them were hit by shelling from the ships that were out at sea. In any case, the firepower of the Germans began to diminish, and I had treated all of the men that were in my area, and I began to walk up and down the beach looking for people that had not been treated. And I found a fellow medic of mine that I knew, and he had an open stomach wound. And I knew there was no help for him because he was bleeding internally from his stomach wound. So I tried to bandage him up and do what I could for him, make him comfortable. I gave him a shot of morphine, and well, I said goodbye to him because I knew I would not see him again. I stayed on the beach until late afternoon because I had been separated from my company. I was assigned to Company F, 2nd Battalion, 16th Infantry Regiment, and I had lost contact with them because of all that confusion. And then I followed some other infantrymen that were walking up in a draw up to Colville, Samir. I followed them in, and it was, by that time it was getting late afternoon or late, and I was very tired. So I laid down in the field someplace and went to sleep. And I continued the next day, and the next day I finally found my medical detachment. And they kept me for a few hours until they were able to find out where F Company, what was left of F Company. All the officers had been killed or wounded. There were no officers left. And about 50% of the company had been annihilated. Anyway, a few hours after, the next day, a few hours after I had joined the detachment, I was sent back to F Company, what was left of it. And yeah, then we proceeded with our mission. We had accomplished our mission. Our mission was to take Colville, Samir, and this mission had been accomplished.